Hello and welcome back to the Pit Stop Podcast. I'm Braydon Dowler-Coltman. I'm joined as always by Jordan Dowler-Coltman. How's it going, Jordan?
Good.
It's been a little while since we had a race, like a whole month. And,
we had the summer break.
And just to top off the summer break, we had the race gods kind of say, no way, you're not racing. 2 laps will be enough. So we're going to touch on that and what that meant. And I believe that was the Belgian Grand Prix. And then we're going to hit off on the Dutch Grand Prix next weekend. All right, so Belgian Grand Prix this week, we had or last week rather, we had a long hiatus in the summer. And then they ended up in Belgium, the Spa-Francorchamps. I'm butchering that so bad. But that's where it was.
Just call it Spa.
And I guess that's what most people do.
Yeah.
I'm still new to this sport, so I'm trying to gain as much knowledge as possible. So we had a qualifying, pretty standard qualifying. There was no sprint or any action like that. But what was crazy about this qualifying was that there was a lot of rain. And that impacted the racers and where they ended up. And then, Jordan, we had 2 laps the next day, and that was it. What's your takeaway from Spa?
Well, let's go back to what you mentioned there a second ago about qualifying. Qualifying is where everything really came to a head, and a lot of drama there, obviously. The first major storyline coming out of qualifying was, yes, the rain and how serious the rain was. Both Lando Norris and Sebastian Vettel were the last 2 out there at one point, and Norris had a very serious crash, spun around several times. All 4 wheels came off the car. And moments before that, over the radio, we had heard how Vettel had been saying to the team, his Aston Martin team, that he didn't feel it was safe to be out there at all. And of course, then moments later, he watched Norris go around and around in front of him. He actually stopped to make sure Norris was okay, which is a great act of showman or of sportsmanship.
How many G's do you think he took? That was an amazing collision.
Yeah, it would have hurt a lot. And definitely he seemed to be feeling the effects of it the next day. But he was prepared to race, and they obviously had to change out the chassis and change out the power unit. And he had taken a serious penalty because of that, just based on the rules. We saw that earlier in the year with Charles Leclerc, and Ferrari elected not to change the power unit going into Monaco, and he lost out on being able to compete at his home race. Norris was ready to really race, but of course then, yes, the second major part of the storyline was the rain. Just before we get there, though, there was one more piece of qualifying, and that was George Russell, who absolutely, I think, shocked people with how well he qualified. Now, he's been nicknamed Mr. Saturday throughout the season because he's been racing so well on Saturdays, because we talked about multiple times, I think, on this show, how the Williams car just is not currently good enough to be able to race in dirty air. They seem to only be able to get that car to perform when there's open, clean air ahead of them, and that's what they get on the Saturday qualifying setup. And he had his best Saturday ever, qualified second, front row, and everyone was really looking forward to see what he could do on Sunday, given that qualifying position. It ended up being what would catapult him to the podium. But yeah, so then the rain came down, and it was sad. And for those of us who PVR'd it here in the Western Hemisphere, it was a very long, fast-forwarding, sort of drawn-out process, waiting to see if we would ever get a race in at all.
Well, it makes me wonder. Cars at the back of the race usually. Would you agree that maybe they're what's the word I'm looking for? Engineering would be more focused on that kind of race, that kind of strategy of how do we compete with dirty air? Because it seems like there's no way really around that, and they have to upgrade their car. But how much of that goes into that process, do you think?
Well, there's certainly some of it. You're right. The Mercedes have had the luxury of knowing that they're going to be up near the front of the pack, and so their aerodynamics packages.
They'd never have to worry about it.
Exactly. They've certainly had different things to think about. And you're right. Maybe the teams at the back their engineers have to think more about how does your car, handle that situation. But that being said, you're still pushing right to the limits of what these cars are capable of doing. And these cars, the amount of energy being generated by these power units means a lot of air to cool it and a lot of air to the combustion, healthy and running, and they're always going to struggle with turbulent air. Now, what we can look forward to, I think, going into next year, is that the new classifications and the new design for the 2022 car is designed to address this very issue, helping to reduce dirty air, reduce drag created by it, and to help get clean, fresh air into those engines more efficiently. That's supposed to allow the cars at the back to be able to follow more closely, creating more opportunities for overtaking and in turn making racing more exciting. So that's sort of being addressed, hopefully moving forward. But yeah, we have seen a lot of the bottom of the table teams struggle this season with their cars not being able to compete in those situations.
Which is what's made George Russell's second place finish in the 2 laps they had all that more exciting. Do you think he has a shot at catching? I mean, there's like 9 races left. Do you think he has a shot at catching Stroll or Tsunoda? I think he's got like 13 points now. Both of those guys have about 18.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, this is what we have to continually remind yourself, is that, this is an incredibly unpredictable sport. Everything can change, in a fraction of a second, as we've seen. Races that we thought were going to go one way, all of a sudden, the whole storyline changes. That's what, Ocon got a win recently because of, just a little bit of chaos happening around him and being able to survive it. And George Russell, the beneficiary of some bad weather today, it's very unlikely, I think, that his car would have put him on the podium had they raced the full race. Sure. However, being in the front, anyone who's going to say, oh, it's not a real podium, it's like, no, he earned this. He earned this by qualifying the way. The circumstances were the same for every team.
And he's probably on cloud 9, which is amazing.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. It's well-deserved, because he's had a great year.
That's right. And so we talked a little bit about next year. We talked a little bit about the changes coming. Carlos Sainz was announced as a return seat for 2022 with Red Bull. When's Mercedes going to announce?
Not Carlos Sainz, Sergio Perez.
Oh, my apologies. Yeah.
But Carlos Sainz is also staying put at Ferrari.
With Leclerc. I want to know when Mercedes is going to make a call here on their second seat. All signs are pointing towards George Russell. Yeah.
Yeah, I think at this point it's a foregone conclusion. It just feels like the time is right for Mercedes to move on from Valtteri Bottas and prepare for the next generation to take an opportunity to chase Lewis. And Lewis obviously has already signed on for next year, which is good news for Mercedes. They are absolutely loving the rivalry between he and Max, and with Red Bull signing their 2 drivers, it sets the 2 major teams up for another head-to-head season. And I think that this performance does nothing but help George Russell, obviously, but it won't be the deciding factor. I think they've probably, Toto Wolff and the Mercedes team has probably already made up their mind. They're just waiting on, crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's, and that could take a couple more weeks. We are kind of in the window of the year where traditionally we start to see some teams making some announcements about those who are coming and going, and we are starting to get those trickle out. The summer break is usually the best time for drivers to start meeting with teams and having a little bit of that. You've got half the season behind you. You kind of know what you're dealing with, and then you can turn your focus a little bit to the future.
Just quickly before we touch on the next race here, who do you think is at risk of losing a seat?
Like not having any seat in the F1 next year?
Well, losing their current seat, I guess, is more specific.
Well, I think Valtteri Bottas is very unlikely to return to Mercedes. But
Valtteri Bottas is not going to leave F1.
No, but the question mark will be the same it was a little bit, I think, for Sergio Perez last year. If that decision isn't made relatively soon for Mercedes, seats are going to start to go away. Good seats are going to start to go away. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what's available? Obviously, there's a big question mark about whether or not this is the end for Kimi Räikkönen, and does he retire? If so, there's a seat at Alfa Romeo available for Valtteri Bottas. We've seen several older drivers, including Kimi, end up at a team like Alfa Romeo. Does Giovinazzi come back for Alfa Romeo? More than likely, I think they're quite happy with his performances this year, but we don't know that. Then you have to ask yourself what else opens up. So is there if Alfa Romeo is looking for two new drivers, one of them might be Valtteri Bottas, but the other one very possibly could be Mick Schumacher moving over from Haas, because of course he was courted by both of those two teams, and to question whether or not he's happy at Haas will be asked. Nikita Mazepin's already signed with Haas, so one of their seats is secured. You go down, the rest of it table, Lance Stroll and Sebastian Vettel are both, sounds like they're both signed up for Aston Martin. It looks like McLaren's happy with their two drivers. They're not going anywhere. So then, maybe Valtteri Bottas finds himself having to just simply do a 1-for-1 swap, and he ends up in a Williams. It's hard to say.
E-Formula for a little bit or something.
I don't think he's leaving F1, as you said. I think he's going to get at least one more contract there to see if he's still got something. The window for him to be a world champion, I think, has closed, but he has an opportunity to continue to win races. And the question is, can he do it in another team's setup? Now, look, Williams is obviously very much been helped by the absolute, next generational talent of George Russell pushing that car as fast as it can, but they are also demonstrating that they are designing a car that is better than any Williams we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years. And moving into this next era, can they continue to do that? We'll wait and to be seen.
It's been a program, a strong program for a long time. Absolutely. And I think that what you're saying there with the new era, that's a huge component here, because they are under new leadership now, and they're really make it their own, right?
The next design of these cars is set up to benefit exactly their kind of team.
That's
awesome. That has been chasing from behind, but an opportunity there. And if Valtteri Bottas has one of those seats, but we'll wait and see. It looks like Alpine is also going to stick with their two drivers, so it's hard to say.
If Bottas could be a number one seat, I think he's got a really good chance at staying highly competitive in F1. All right, let's leave that conversation alone. Let's just quickly touch here on the upcoming race, the Dutch Grand Prix this Sunday. We got qualifying Saturday, some practice Friday at the CM.com Circuit van Weert in North Holland. This sounds like a fun place. My understanding is it's a rather fast track. Jordan, what do people need to know about the Dutch Grand Prix?
Well, it's obviously going to be Max Verstappen's home race. That's going to be exciting. There's going to be a lot of attention on him, and I mean, it's funny because
a lot of orange flags. You mean?
Yeah, totally. And we didn't get a race this week, so we're kind of right where we started. I mean, I should say we didn't get a race. We got 2 laps, and as you say,
those poor fans didn't get a race, though. And that,
and I think that's definitely what disappointed people the most. So, just also a quick housekeeping thing there. The results from this weekend. Every point that was assigned for the final table is cut in half. So the traditional numbers have all been slashed in half because they didn't make it through 75% of what the set race was. So Verstappen might have won, but he only gained 12.5 points. Russell had 9 points for his second place, and Hamilton in third only gets 7.5. So there's, although Verstappen can say he came back from the summer break and with a win, not in the traditional sense, he's still trailing Hamilton by 3 points or 3.5. No, just 3 points. They've each got half points now. So, this will be the real comeback race for both of them, and to see who's going to take the lead here, or in Hamilton's case, increase his lead. So that'll be exciting. And that's really, I think, the major storyline is just won't it be great if we can actually get back to real racing? Because that's what the fans and everybody, and I'm sure all the teams, it's kind of like this, you come back from the break with all of this anticipation and all of this sort of energy ready to go, and you just literally get rained out. So we'll see.
Well, and I think for Verstappen, this is a whole month, and he was out early in the Hungarian Grand Prix. And that's I think he was out again in the British Grand Prix, so he hasn't raced a lot in a little while. So it'll be nice to see him competing again back on the track. What else do people need to know here about this race?
Well, I think, like I said, it's going to tell us a lot about what's coming up in the future for us. As you mentioned, it's a very fun track. 72 laps. a couple of really nice tight turns, but some awesome straightaways too, between sort of the pit row straightaway is a nice aggressive place for some passes that ends in quite a tight hairpin turn. And then there's some good sloping elevation. So it's one of those race courses that definitely there's potential for fun drama. And if teams, if the teams can push throughout qualifying and we can get an interesting, another kind of interesting full weekend out of it, that would be awesome.
Okay, well, it's certainly bound to be an exciting race. I hope that we get all 3 hours of the experience and that we've got nice weather. It's going to be happening Sunday, September 5th, 7 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Set your PVRs or what have you. You do not want to miss this race. We've been far too long away from racing. Thanks again for checking out the Pit Stop podcast. We are happy to be back. Jordan, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And you can check out everything Pit Stop Podcast on the HatTrick feed on Instagram. And you can find this podcast anywhere that you stream your podcasts. Until next week, thank you very much. The Pit Stop Podcast is presented by HatTrick Sports and is a member of the Ordinary Podcasting Network. The show is produced by Jordan and Braydon Dowler-Coltman each week, but mainly Jordan. And you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks for listening. The Ordinary Podcasting Network wishes to acknowledge that the lands on which our conversations take place include Treaty 6 territory, the traditional meeting ground and home for many indigenous peoples, including the Prix, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and the Nakota Sioux peoples, as well as the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations, and we extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live, create, and share stories on these territories.
The Ordinary Podcasting Network intends to engage in conversations and dialogue which acknowledge that reconciliation is not a destination, but a journey, and that we remain committed to practicing our craft in a decolonized space.